There comes a moment in life when something inside you quietly breaks. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. One day you wake up and realize you are still breathing, still functioning, still answering messages, still smiling when required. Yet internally, you feel completely collapsed. The person you used to be feels distant. Your energy disappears, motivation fades. Even things that once made you happy feel meaningless, and the terrifying parts, you don't even know exactly when. It happened. Carl Jung believed emotional collapse is not a weakness. It is not a failure. It is not the end of your story. It is the psyche demanding rebirth. Because according to Jung, the human soul does not collapse without purpose. Emotional collapse happens when the life you were living is no longer aligned with who you truly are. Most people misunderstand emotional breakdowns. Society tells you to stay strong, move on, be positive, but Jung warned that forced positivity is psychological repression. When pain is ignored, it does not disappear, it goes underground, and what is buried in the unconscious eventually returns stronger, heavier, and more destructive. Emotional collapse often begins after prolonged self-betrayal. You stayed in relationships where you felt unseen. You tolerated disrespect. You suppressed anger to keep peace. You abandoned your needs to avoid rejection. Slowly, you are disconnected from your authentic self, and the psyche noticed. Jung described this as the moment when the ego loses control. The identity you built, the strong one, the responsible one, the one who never complains, begins to crumble. Suddenly you feel exhausted for no reason. You overthink constantly. Memories return unexpectedly. Old wounds reopen. You question your worth, your direction, your identity. This is not random suffering. Jung called it the confrontation with the shadow. The shadow is everything you were taught to hide. Your anger, your sadness, your unmet desires, your fears, your truth. For years, you pushed these parts away to be accepted, loved, or safe. But the psyche seeks wholeness, not perfection. Emotional collapse occurs when the shadow demands recognition, and this stage feels terrifying because the old version of you cannot survive the truth that is emerging. You may notice strange experiences during this period. Silence feels heavier than noise. Social interactions drain you. You withdraw without fully understanding why. You replay conversations endlessly. You feel grief even when nothing recent has happened. Jung believed this is the psyche reorganizing itself. The unconscious begins speaking through emotions because logic alone cannot heal what was emotionally wounded. Here is the paradox, Jung revealed. Emotional collapse is often the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming your real self. The life you built before collapse may have been based on expectations, survival patterns, or childhood conditioning. You became who others needed you to be. But the authentic self cannot live forever behind a mask. Eventually, the soul rebels. Many people panic at this stage and try to escape. They distract themselves with work, relationships, social media, or constant busyness. But avoidance prolongs suffering. Jung warned that what you resist persists. Healing begins only when you stop running from the collapse and start listening to it. Emotional pain is communication. The psyche is saying, this version of you is no longer sustainable. You may feel lost because the old identity is dying while the new self has not yet formed. This psychological space between who you were and who you are becoming feels like emptiness. Jung compared it to alchemy, where old material must dissolve before transformation occurs. In alchemy, this phase was called negredo, The dark night where everything appears ruined before rebirth begins. And this is why emotional collapse feels so lonely. Others see only your silence, but inside you are rebuilding from fragments. You are questioning beliefs you once accepted blindly. You are recognizing patterns you tolerated for years. You are seeing truths you once avoided. Pain becomes awareness. Awareness becomes transformation. The most important realization Jung offered is this: emotional collapse is not punishment. It is initiation. Life is forcing you to meet yourself honestly for the first time. The breakdown is actually a breakthrough disguised as suffering. The psyche destroys illusions so authenticity can emerge. Right now, if you feel broken, exhausted, or disconnected, understand this: you are not regressing. You are entering psychological reconstruction. The old personality is dissolving because it was built for survival, not fulfillment. Something deeper within you is preparing to rise. But rebuilding yourself requires courage, because the next stage is the hardest part of Jung's process, facing the truths you avoided your entire life. And most people never reach this stage, not because they cannot heal, but because they are afraid of what they might discover about themselves when the mask finally falls. And this is where real transformation begins. After emotional collapse, the first instinct most people feel is to fix themselves quickly. You want relief. You want clarity. You want to become the old version of yourself again. But Carl Jung warned that true healing does not mean returning to who you were, because the person you were is the very structure that collapsed. Rebuilding yourself requires something far more uncomfortable. It requires meeting the parts of yourself you spent years avoiding. This stage is what Jung called shadow integration, and it is here that most people either transform or remain emotionally stuck. For years, you developed psychological defenses. You learned to hide anger, so people would stay. You learned to silence your needs to avoid abandonment. You learned to appear strong even when you were hurting. These patterns protected you once, but now they imprison you. Emotional collapse removes those defenses suddenly. You begin noticing truths that once felt invisible. You recognize relationships where you gave more than you received. You see how often you minimized your pain. You realize how much of your identity was built around being accepted rather than being authentic. This realization hurts deeply because it forces you to confront grief not only for what happened, but for who you abandoned yourself to become. Jung believed healing begins when suffering becomes conscious. The moment you stop asking, "Why am I broken?" and start asking, "What is this pain trying to teach me?" everything changes. The psyche speaks through emotions. Anxiety often signals ignored boundaries. Depression can appear when life loses meaning. Anger reveals violated values. Emotional collapse is not random chaos. It is psychological information, and when you finally listen instead of resisting, you begin rebuilding from truth rather than illusion. One of Jung's most powerful ideas was that growth requires holding opposites within yourself. You must accept that you are both strong and vulnerable, loving and angry, confident and afraid. For many people, this feels uncomfortable because society teaches us to choose only the acceptable traits. But wholeness comes from integration, not perfection. You are not meant to eliminate your darkness. You are meant to understand it. When you deny anger, it turns into resentment. When you deny sadness, it becomes numbness. When you deny fear, it becomes anxiety. But when you acknowledge these emotions without judgment, they transform into wisdom. This is why emotional collapse often feels like isolation. You begin withdrawing from environments that no longer match your evolving self. Conversations feel shallow. Old habits lose appeal. You may feel disconnected from people who once felt familiar. This is not arrogance. It is psychological realignment. The psyche naturally releases what no longer supports growth. Jung described this stage as individuation, the journey toward becoming psychologically whole. It requires radical honesty. You begin recognizing how childhood experiences shaped your beliefs about love, success, and worth. You notice patterns repeating across relationships. You understand that healing is not about blaming others, but reclaiming responsibility for your inner world. This realization is empowering but also frightening because it removes the illusion of control. You can no longer pretend that external validation will save you. The rebuilding process demands solitude. Solitude is not loneliness. It is the environment where the authentic self emerges. When external noise quiets, you begin hearing your inner voice again. You rediscover forgotten desires. Creativity returns slowly. Curiosity reawakens. You start asking questions you avoided before. What do I actually want? What feels true to me? What am I pretending not to know? During this phase, you may experience emotional waves. Some days feel hopeful, other days feel heavy. Jung emphasized that healing is cyclical, not linear. Progress often looks like regression, because deeper layers of the psyche surface gradually. The unconscious releases pain in manageable pieces. This is why patience becomes essential. Many people sabotage their healing by rushing transformation. They seek instant happiness, new relationships, or sudden purpose. But Jung warned that premature reconstruction creates another false identity. True rebuilding happens slowly, through awareness, reflection, and emotional honesty. You begin setting boundaries where silence once existed. You stop explaining yourself excessively. You learn to tolerate discomfort instead of escaping it. You recognize that self-respect sometimes requires disappointing others. And as this happens, something subtle changes inside you. You no longer chase validation. The same way you feel less desperate for approval. More grounded, more aware, more real. Another critical step Jung described is reclaiming projection. For years, you may have projected parts of yourself onto others. You saw strength in someone else because you doubted your own. You admired confidence because you felt inadequate. You feared rejection because you rejected parts of yourself. Healing means bringing those projections back. You realize the qualities you sought externally already existed within you. This awareness is powerful because it restores psychological balance. You stop searching for completion outside yourself. You begin experiencing inner stability. The emotional collapse that once felt like destruction slowly reveals itself as liberation. You are no longer performing a role. You are becoming authentic. But this stage introduces a new challenge. The world may not immediately recognize the new you. Some relationships may shift. Some people may resist your boundaries. Some may misunderstand your silence. Jung explained that individuation often separates you from collective expectations. But this separation is necessary because growth requires authenticity over approval. And then one day, you notice something remarkable. The same triggers that once shattered you lose their power. You respond instead of react. You observe emotions instead of drowning in them. You feel pain without losing yourself in it. This is the beginning of psychological resilience. Not the absence of suffering, but the ability to remain whole within it. You realize emotional collapse was not the end of your strength, it was the beginning of self-awareness. But the final stage of rebuilding yourself is the most profound of all. It is the moment when you stop trying to become who you think you should be, and finally allow yourself to become who you truly are. And now you arrive at the final stage of rebuilding yourself, the stage Carl Jung believed very few people ever reach. Because this stage requires something deeper than healing. It requires transformation. After emotional collapse and shadow integration, something inside you becomes quieter, not empty, but clear. You no longer feel the same urgency to prove yourself. You stop chasing validation. You stop explaining your worth. You begin living from inner alignment rather than external approval. Jung believed that true psychological rebirth happens when the ego stops controlling life and begins cooperating with the self. The self, according to Jung, is the deepest center of your psyche. It is who you were before fear shaped you, before rejection silenced you, before survival forced you to wear masks. Rebuilding yourself means allowing this deeper self to lead. And this moment feels different from motivation or temporary confidence. It feels calm, stable, grounded. You realize healing was never about becoming stronger than pain. It was about becoming honest with yourself for the first time. You stop asking, how do I fix myself? And start asking, how do I live truthfully? This shift changes everything. You begin making decisions that once felt impossible. You walk away from situations that drain your soul. You stop negotiating your boundaries. You choose peace over approval. And strangely, this new version of you does not feel dramatic. It feels natural. Jung explained that individuation does not create a new personality. It reveals the one that was always hidden beneath conditioning. You are not becoming someone else. You are remembering who you are. Many people fear this stage because authenticity attracts both connection and loss. Some people will feel inspired by your growth. Others may feel uncomfortable because your transformation exposes the roles they expected you to continue playing. You may notice certain relationships fading, conversations change, energies shift. This is not failure. It is psychological evolution. The life aligned with your authentic self cannot coexist with environments built around your old identity. One of Jung's deepest teachings was that suffering gains meaning when it leads to consciousness. When you understand your pain, you are no longer controlled by it. The memories that once triggered emotional collapse become sources of wisdom. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances. You recognize yourself as a participant in your own transformation. This awareness creates inner freedom. You forgive differently not because others suddenly deserve forgiveness, but because you refuse to carry emotional weight that no longer belongs to you. Forgiveness becomes release, not reconciliation. You reclaim your energy. You reclaim your attention. You reclaim your life. And something remarkable happens. You begin trusting yourself again. Decisions feel clearer. Intuition becomes stronger. You notice subtle inner signals guiding you away from harm and toward growth. Jung believed intuition is the language of the integrated psyche. When conscious and unconscious parts of the mind cooperate, you experience inner coherence. This coherence creates resilience. Life still brings challenges. Pain still exists. Loss still happens. But you no longer collapse under pressure because your identity is no longer fragile. You are rooted within yourself. Emotional collapse once felt like destruction, but now you see it was initiation. It dismantled illusions. It removed false identities. It forced you into self-confrontation, and through that confrontation, you discovered strength that cannot be taken away. You learned that rebuilding yourself is not a single event. It is an ongoing relationship with your inner world. Some days you will still feel uncertain. Some wounds may still ache. But now you possess awareness, and awareness changes everything you recognize. Emotional signals earlier. You respond consciously rather than react unconsciously. You nurture your inner life instead of abandoning it. Jung described this final stage as psychological wholeness, not perfection, but integration. Light and shadow coexist. Strength and vulnerability coexist. Logic and emotion coexist. You no longer fight yourself. You understand yourself. And perhaps the most beautiful part of rebuilding yourself is this. You stop fearing emotional collapse. Because you understand that endings are often disguised beginnings. The psyche evolves through cycles of breakdown and renewal. What once terrified you becomes familiar. You trust that even darkness has purpose. You become someone who can walk through uncertainty without losing identity. Some people will ask what changed about you. They may notice your calm presence, your boundaries, your quiet confidence. But the real change is invisible. You are no longer living to survive. You are living consciously. You choose relationships that nourish rather than deplete. You choose work that aligns rather than suffocates. You choose authenticity even when it costs comfort. And this is the rebirth Jung spoke about. Not becoming perfect, not becoming fearless, but becoming whole. The person who once collapsed emotionally is gone. Not destroyed, but transformed. The pain did not end you. It revealed you. And now you understand the deepest truth of psychological growth. You were never rebuilding from nothing. You were rebuilding from truth. The self that emerged after collapse is stronger because it is real. And once you become real, you no longer need to pretend. You no longer need to chase. You no longer need to prove. You simply exist in alignment with who you are. And that is the true meaning of rebuilding yourself after emotional collapse.